esteemed speakers. From epistemology to history, from ethnicity to intersectionality, from objectivity to subjecthood, from reality to hypocrisy. A diverse range of issues on the Rohingya Chronicle will be discussed. Through the lens of the experts and the researchers, a visualization of the Rohingya pre-camp blues will be staged. I believe that this is quite an opportunity for everyone present here today, from students to faculty, young and senior researchers alike. The Rohingyas, predominantly Muslims, are one of the many ethnic minorities in Myanmar, a predominantly Buddhist country. The government of Myanmar denies the Rohingya citizenship and even refuses to recognize them as a people and considers them as illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. Harsh identity crisis, sporadic violence, and systematic discrimination have long been part of Rohingyas living in Myanmar. In August 2017, the world witnessed the textbook example of ethnic cleansing by the Myanmar government, forcing 700,000 Rohingyas to flee to the neighboring Bangladesh. This exodus was a result of a horrendous genocide in the northern Rakhine province. At least 6,700 Rohingya, including 730 children under the age of 5, were killed. Families were separated. Women and girls were gang raped by Myanmar minority. The satellite images show many areas where Rohingya villages were reduced to smoldering rubble, where nearby ethnic Rakhine villages were not even touched. The state-led operation eventually jeopardized the lives of thousands of Rohingyas by creating a new identity for them: refugee, boat people, citizen without state. We are about to embark upon a historical and socio-political journey that brings to the forefront the unfortunate realities of the Rohingya people. The next 2 hours will highlight the pre-camp scenario, such as tension, torture, transformation, insecurity, and identity crisis. Each speaker will get 10 minutes time to present their argument and will be reminded to make their concluding remark as they near the end of their presentation. The last minutes are reserved for question and answer session. We will have almost half an hour time for that. I would request the audience to hold your queries until that time. So let us begin this session. And thank you once again. So we'll go maintaining the schedule. The first presentation is on ethnicity, identity, and Rohingya security, olive tree and Lexus tension. It will be presented by Mr. Obaidullah Al-Marzouk, Senior Lecturer, Department of Social Sciences and Humanities, IUB.
Assalamu alaikum and very good afternoon, distinguished colleagues from IUB and outside institutions. It's my pleasure presenting the paper on a very crucial topic here, which is digging the issue into the depth of history. And personally, I can connect to this issue very well because I personally visited the camps more than one occasion, and that gives me kind of a commitment or a sense of responsibility to do something from my own vantage point. So here I am presenting this paper, mostly cultivating the question of identity, which is a big dilemma whenever we talk about Rohingya issues. Please let me begin. Can you please shift the slide? Yeah, thank you. So first, let's put the issue in the context from a bit wider perspective. See, we all live on Earth, and this planet Earth allows all these species live peacefully, quote unquote. Somehow we identify as Homo sapiens, and there actually the problem begins. Because let's say for carnivores, identifying or owning something is part of their survival, which is very similar for the Homo sapiens, but somehow it is more than just survival. Actually, it becomes more convoluted when it's connected to, race, religion, location, land, and so many things. So that gives us a very narrow scope to rethink about our identity. We live on Earth sharing this land, which is livable for all of us. But where does this demarcations come from? What are these borders? Somehow we have taken these borders as inevitable, invincible. So problem begins. Whenever we talk about Rohingya issues, there are a lot of common facts that we deal with. Identity is somewhat independent issue when it comes to marginalization, displacement, and other sorts of oppressions. Many countries already aver this as a genocide, yet the Myanmar government gainsaid the ICJ rulings, capitalizing their so-called transition to democracy and sustainable development. We can read it as neoliberal, ambitious mercantile projects. Now, we have been bombarded with all these facts. We know that they are the most marginalized as well as the most persecuted refugee communities in the global South. Not only that, they're the largest group of stateless people, constituting nearly 1/3 of total population of such kind, which is a big total. Now, if we start, the problem again clicks us here that where is the point we can begin? Where should we start? This really matters. If we borrow the lens from Benjamin Zawacki, he repeatedly emphasized this point that the way we actually frame a group of people, population, and where we start, that matters, especially in the case of Rohingyas. Just to make it very brief, the whole identity maze, let me recapitulate the whole discussion in just 10 points. Okay, but before that, these are the 4 objectives that I have in my mind for this paper, which is still ongoing. And I borrowed 2 frameworks from, one from Zawacki and other from Thomas Friedman, as put in the title. Mostly I depended on literature review, my fieldwork, and secondary data analysis. Now let's begin with this 10 points, like 10 commandments. First, there are growing pieces of evidence that the earliest records of the arrival of Muslims, as we know Rohingya, can be traced back at least to the 9th century, who further stayed and amalgamated through marriage and business. The problem here is, repeatedly the Myanmar government, they claim that they actually, migrated from elsewhere. They put actually the name of Chittagong, which happened during the British colony. If I name some of them like Aye Chan, King Mong So, Jacques P. Lida, who is not from Myanmar though, Derek Tongkin, he is currently heading the Myanmar Resource, Myanmar Library, something like that, Network Myanmar. They're repeatedly propagating the Myanmar government agenda. And their whole argument is based on the population increase between 1824 and 1911. And this particular period actually is connected with the British rule. So their principal argument is when British annexed this part of the South Asia with their British Raj, what happened, they somehow forced these people from Chittagong and other regions to migrate to Arakan to actually establish British rule. So that was the main argument here. So To rebut the argument, we have Azim Ibrahim, who is the author of this very contextual book. The book is called The Rohingya, published from a British company. I forgot, anyway, probably Hearst. I met him personally, and the author claims that the whole set of data actually presented as fallacious and they're misrepresented. But however, otherwise competent, his argument cannot fully describe the notion of population increase during the segment. And that kept me like haunted for long when I started studying this. And finally, to my content, I found someone else called Habib Siddiqui, who is actually an activist, not a hardcore academic. But anyway, he actually identified this gap by comparing with this concurrent population growth in other regions, and which clearly shows that's totally organic. The second point is temporary migration during the British rule, which I explained already. And then we have Burma military oppression that happened before this period when British acquired this piece of land. So what happened? Both Buddhist and Muslim, they actually suffered, and they were actually, cornered, polarized because of this military oppression. Many of them took refuge in Chittagong, in Assam, in other parts of the neighboring areas. But when British came back to the rule, they actually returned to their motherland, which was projected as, illegal immigration by the later Myanmar government. Then in the fifth point, we have, the total population in the Rakhine region. By the 19th century, there were two dominant ethnic groups. One is Buddhist Rakhine, other is Muslim Rakhine. Well, they were going along very well, until, when Japanese army took over and dilapidating British rule actually let these two groups fight their war, instead of, themselves. So what happened? Buddhist Rakhine, they actually supported the Japanese army, while Muslims, they're the only exception in the whole region, they wholeheartedly supported British rule here. And that was the actually planting of the conflict seed here. So the two communities, they started actually competing with each other. After independence in 1948, until now, no Myanmar government acknowledged the citizenship right of the Rohingyas. So we see if the seed of the division within Arakan is planted by the relinquishing British rulers as their inveterate practice, then the later military regimes in Myanmar, they actually grafted the scion, which identified the Rohingyas as illegals. Let's just quickly move on to the next slides. If we just summarize the key problem here, we identify that, there are multifaceted problems. On one hand, we have Rohingya people who cannot be the bona fide citizens of either Myanmar, neither Bangladesh. So they're in a totally perplexing situation. Ethnically, they look like the people they do not want to be with, but they actually want to be with someone who actually look them differently. Here, religious identity is not actually a way out, because otherwise, protagonists of so-called Muslim nationalism, countries like Iran, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, they, fail to address the problem from the, benign political motives. So that's the problem proliferates here to a greater intensity. So what happens when this kinds of problem continue to sustain? We see the emergence of security problems, and which is highly politicized term, because security threats depend on who is actually feeling or talking about the threat. So it can be both ways. So it's not just we feel threatened, maybe it is those people whom we are referring as threat also being threatened by us. It's both ways. So we see a huge connection between these two, as Natasha Hamilton, Professor Howard Tiffany, both of them, they strongly identify this linkage between suppressed identity issues with the emergence of larger militant problems. So in conclusion, so if we borrow this olive tree and Lexus analogies here, we can actually identify olive tree as the identity root, which gives us the purpose, the home for Rohingya people. And strange thing about this identity issue is that Myanmar people see them as outsider, while they see this their own olive tree rooted in Rakhine. So the question is very perplexing one, because there is no direct solution here. And on the other hand, we have Lexus, which is neoliberal projects in the name of development, which actually probably the ulterior motive is to throw them away. So when we focus overly on the issue of identity, it can turn into violence that can be presumed so easily from this context. So end of the day, if there is no civil solution of such a problem, a militant response is something arguably more costly for the host countries like Myanmar. However, if it turns into a violent response like terrorism, the question is, whom should we blame or accuse? The victims? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Marzouk, for your thoughtful presentation on the identity dispute of the Rohingya. Next, we will have an online presentation by Ms. Ibtisam Afrin. She will be presenting on the topic titled Rohingyas, Refugee Future, History, Memory, and Relocation. Please welcome Ms. Ibtisam Afrin.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you, Ibtisam.
Hello, all. Good afternoon. I'm Ibtisam Afrin, and currently a PhD student at the University of Western Ontario. Though I belong to IUB, I'm a lecturer at the Department of Social Sciences and Humanities, and now in my...
We cannot hear you. Please check your audio.
I'm unmuted. Hello.
But some of us can hear her pretty well.
Is the audio working well?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Not really, not that loud.
Just wait a second.
I think the problem could be at the receiving end, because some of us can hear her pretty well, pretty loud and clear.
Yeah.
Is it working well now?
Yeah, we can hear.
Raise your volume, Ibtisam. We can't hear you.
It's pretty high in here. Volume is high.
As Sar suggested, I think the problem is on the other side, because we can hear her pretty loud here.
Ibtisam, do the other people online can hear you?
Yeah,
in the IB campus cannot.
Okay. I don't know what's the problem here.
Are the other people hearing you, Ibtisam? Please ask them.
I think the people in the Zoom can hear me well.
Yeah, we can hear you very well, in fact.
Yeah, I would go about it. Yes.
Should I continue?
I apologize for this technical difficulty. Ms. Ibtisam, I would request you to take a few minutes and let us present Mr. Niloy Ranjan Biswas in the meantime. Then we'll get back to you after his presentation. So may I welcome Dr. Niloy Ranjan Biswas. He will be presenting on identity, intersectionality, and Cox's Bazar refugee, remaking the Rohingyas. Thank you.
Can I have the slides open? Thank you. Right. Yeah, thank you, esteemed chair, distinguished guests, my co-panelists. It's an honor to be invited to present in this August gathering, particularly on Rohingya refugee issues. Since we have 10 minutes and I can definitely explain everything over here, so I'll try to be very focused on one particular issue, that is the relationship between identity and intersectionality. My previous speaker has already discussed about identity, so and we have the informed audience over here, both on the content that is the Rohingya refugees living in Bangladesh, and also the concept which is identity. So, I do not have to explain what is this, but the reason, the way how I problematize this concept is because I think we have had scholarship in the academia which talks about how identity is problematized, whether this is about a particular group of people within their own country, or it has been a matter of expansion and the refugees that go to a different country take refuge, and the relationship between the refugees and the host community. Nevertheless, it is also important for us to reinsert the matter how this relationship between the host communities and the refugees evolved, and that can also contribute in understanding the identity of the refugees. To contextualize this in the Rohingya perspective, I think it is important to understand that the way how Bengalis or citizens of Bangladeshis understand Rohingyas is that the way how we try to identify Rohingyas from the lens of the Myanmar state narratives. Or there are also, contributing factors to identify Rohingyas, and that is quite unique to the way how host communities, people living close to the camps in Greater Cox's Bazar area, have also something to ponder upon. So my major questions are, what are the relationship and how the relationship has evolved between the host community and the Rohingya refugees. And we need to definitely take this into consideration that, this is not only about the Rohingya incidents after 2017, although my field works are mostly, timed after 2017, but our understanding, or particularly the understanding of the host community, goes much beyond that. And the second point is, how does the intersectionality helps here? And by intersectionality, I would like to identify, when we talk about the intersections of cultural identity, religious identity, political identity, and social identity. So there are different factors that work and that also contribute in forming the identity. So, this is very important for us because in many literature, intersectionality is also identified as a form of expression, particularly when we think about identifying a specific group or class, not only based on one particular factor, which is, for example, language or ethnicity or religion. So for Rohingyas, I think it is important for us to understand that, there are also events, or there are also factors of intersectionality, that is the religious, national, ethnicity, social, and other factors which work quite significantly to identify the way how Myanmar state or the majority, sections of the people identify Rohingyas as they are. Similarly, it is important for us to also understand that identity is not a static concept. often in the Western literature, it is identified, particularly when we try to identify a particular ethnic class or ethnic nation with the state as well. So, the famous, scholarships of the nation state and nationalism and ethnicity and so on and so forth. But I would like to borrow the idea of Amartya Sen's famous book, 2000, which was published in 2006 and talked about identity and violence, where Sen particularly identified that the construction of self, that is the identity, is not static, and there is always an effort by the state to create a very static and narrow idea, or a solitary, quote unquote, the word that Amartya Sen has used, that is a solitarist identity that has been the effort of the state to identify the people who are living within its perimeter. It creates a significant other. That means who doesn't fit with the criteria that state basically identifies. The others remain. The other becomes others. So they are significant others. So Rohingya, the way how they have become others in the Myanmar state. Add on, the point, intersectionality also explains that how different factors actually work, which is again the religious identity, the language, even education and other backgrounds, which also creates a strong factor and sometimes helps a state which builds on the majoritarian nationhood or ethnicity and creates significant others. So one can start from 1982 Citizenship Act and onwards, and to identify how, within the understanding of the solitarist identity construction processes, Rohingyas were become a significant other, aka the stateless in Myanmar. And that is not only the fact, because Rohingyas are not only identified as Rohingyas or someone different, they have multiple identities in Myanmar, and they are Bengali, so they are mostly from the Bengali citizens. They are also identified locally as Kala, and it is not the skin color Kala, it is basically the non-Bamars, or they are basically short in height, and they are identified as Muslim. And sometimes the word Muslim or Islam is not also used. Tabligh is identified as a significant part of the identity, because they, a significant of the Muslims are belong to that particular class in the Rakhine state. And very recently, after 9/11, they are also identified as terrorists, and their affiliation with ARSA, in Arabic, Harkaul Yakin or not. So this entire process and various symbols basically identify that it is not only the either ethnic identity or language or religious, but an intersection of different factors which basically make Rohingya stateless. Now, how that impact, in fact, you can also see that there are different symbols and materialistic kind of like symbols which basically identify that how, that explain that how Rohingyas were made stateless, whether it is land, rejection of the land ownership, religious practices, securitized, villages, alien cards, or so on and so forth. But the most important thing is that, how that impact the local Bangladesh's, construction of Rohingya identity in Bangladesh, or in particularly in Cox's Bazar, or even in Dhaka city as well, because I'm sure that some of you here in Dhaka city have heard one particular person, or maybe a rickshaw puller, to say another rickshaw puller a Rohingya, right? Or maybe someone, and to demean someone, to identify or coin the term Rohingya and said, okay, that person is a Rohingya. Now, how a person in Dhaka, others identify as Rohingya? Has Rohingya been a terminology that is basically indicating a very negative word over there? So I started doing a very structured analysis of local newspapers and national newspapers, which is yet to be done. But my unstructured part of the research, which was the in-depth interviews of the local host communities, mostly in the later part of 2019, gave me some interesting identities. And some of the identity markers are here. So Rohingyas are often, and this is, I'm just saying a cautionary note that I'm not generalizing, because this is not a survey or quantitative research that I have done on that. But my respondents, and there is a perception among the local host community that Rohingyas are either primitive or uneducated. Rohingyas are malnourished. That's why the CSOs, international and nationals, they are giving quality foods to them as reliefs. Rohingyas are disease vectors. They brought HIV/AIDS from Myanmar, and that was the plan of the Myanmarese government to fix the Bangladesh in a different way. they're unruly and they're violent. They're very poor, and that's why they will grab all the jobs in Cox's Bazar areas. They're criminals and they're polygamous. Now, as I have said that I'm not generalizing, and there is no structured or scientific study to explain that are they really so. But it is very important to see that how that image has been constructed. Is there anything of that intersectionality that I have mentioned that has been transformed across the border? That means the way how Rohingyas were framed in Myanmar has also influenced the conception or maybe the perception of the local Bengali community. Because I have, my respondents also told me in the in-depth interview that they were unruly in Myanmar and that's why they were sent back. And again, I'm not generalizing, that's one perception maybe. And in the interview, one person said, which is quite interesting, that amra tran noy, amra puritran chai. So we want to be relieved. So let's send all the Rohingyas to Bhashanchor and free Cox's Bazar. So it's quite interesting to see that the process, how these identities were marked and how these qualities were there. And again, this is not only after 2017, because in 3 years it's very difficult to identify someone as a disease vector or a poor or a criminal or something like that. There are quantitative data which shows, yes, Cox's Bazar's criminal statistics has gone up, but yet there are many other places in Bangladesh which shows more criminal statistics than Cox's Bazar itself. So there is no reason to generalize that all Rohingyas are drug vectors or disease vectors or things like that. So my final point, which I'd like to emphasize on, is that this is a very important thing to study, just not only to improve. I mean, there is no, there is no normative reasons of doing this study that we need to improve relations or something like that. That's the task of the policymakers. I'm just trying to identify that how different factors conjoin together to give an identity of a Rohingya. It's not just they're Muslim or they're Bengali or they can speak close to how the Chittagonian languages or people in Cox's Bazar have almost like similar tones or things like that. The first or the two things that I would like to highlight is that Rohingya is not a single self, or Rohingya is not a single identity. Now, if we try to identify that, then I think if we have that the basic idea that Rohingya is a self identity, it will be very difficult for the academicians, the policymakers to make policies, even if it is repatriation or it is relief. There are multiple identities within Rohingyas which has built in Myanmar and which has been in the process of building in Bangladesh itself. And the othering process is also very important. And the way how Rohingyas were made significant others, aka stateless in Myanmar, has also influenced the othering process in Bangladesh as well. Of course, refugees are different from the citizens of Bangladesh. I mean, there is no reason that we want all Rohingyas become Bangladeshi according to the legal ground. But the significant othering is complicated and difficult when we are thinking this about from the humanitarian ground point. So that's the point. So we need to maybe ponder upon or do further research on that. Thank you so much. Maybe I have questions to answer in the Q&A. Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you, Dr. Nila Ranjan Vishwas, for your informative presentation and unfolding different identities identities for the Rohingyas in Bangladesh. We'll try to catch Mr. Ibtisam Afrin. Ibtisam, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me now?
We need a bit louder.
I'm speaking a bit loudly.
Yeah, I think now we can get you. So Ms. Ibtisam Afrin, lecturer of the Department of Social Sciences and Humanities, currently on study leave, will be presenting Rohingya Refugee Future, History, Memory, and Relocation.
Hello all, thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's 3 a.m. here and I hope I am not bothering my roommates over here. Anyway, as I'm saying, I was saying that I belong to IUB, and the belongingness is what I would be focusing on to connect my the paper is history, memory. Okay, So I was saying that I belong to IB, and that particularly connects to my research paper because belongingness comes from memory, past events, and special feelings. But it's quite tough for the Rohingyas as they are now stateless and refugees. Well, the title of my paper is History, Memory, and Relocation, the Future of Rohingya Refugees. Oh, sorry, I think I forgot to show my PowerPoint slides. Just a second. Yeah. For today's discussion, I will be focusing on two particular aspects, memory and trauma, and the relocation as to address the future of Rohingya Muslims in Bangladesh. To start with, I will revisit the Rohingya refugee context in Bangladesh. The background of the Rohingya refugee crisis came to the discussion of today several times. However, I will again walk you through some of the facts, as I think this information should repeatedly come forward because first, it will help us to become aware of the current political aspects, and second, we will be able to identify political acts that helps to identify the identity politics. So far, more than 7 lakh Rohingya refugees took refuge in Bangladesh, and Bangladesh is geographically a small country compared to the neighboring countries, and it is densely populated. However, Bangladesh is empathetic to the Rohingya refugees. They gave shelter to many of the Rohingya refugees and also pursuing repatriation with Myanmar for a long time. Following several failed attempts to repatriate with Myanmar, Bangladesh considered relocation of Rohingya refugees to a new location as it will help improve the current refugee camps' living conditions and also address the risk of COVID-19. And recently, a group of Rohingyas were moved to that secluded land, the Bhashanchar. Now, the debate arose whether this relocation is voluntary or forced. If or if not, what will happen to the repatriation plan? One of my concerns is to look into the fact whether we are giving necessary importance to the memory study of the community who are in exile. But why memory and trauma? I came across a book, First They Erased Our Name, a book by Habibur Rahman and Sophie Ansel. I'm particularly referring to this book because the author of this book is a Rohingya refugee and is now currently residing in Australia. The book includes the glorious past of the Rohingyas who used to live, glorious past they used to live, the horrendous ethnocide they have experienced, and their survival events. And also it includes the journey of the Rohingya refugee in several countries. Now, how many times we are able to listen to the Rohingya refugee? Have their voice ever reached to us? We see their movements, but not their experiences. If we try to listen to them, by reflecting on their past, I believe we will be able to develop some policies that speaks to the Rohingya Muslims. They will not remain refugee anymore. Movements are political acts and that reflect on memory. They try to reconstruct the present and establishing the voices to the oppressed. Therefore, I think focusing on the memory will help us to identify political acts. Several attempts has been made so far to in the refugee studies to understand memory, trauma, and the other themes. However, a little amount of focus has been given to the Rohingya memories to rethink the crisis. In my opinion, refugees in a larger context share some collective experience. It is obvious that each community and context has treated them differently. But in terms of collective experiences, there are some but in terms of collective experiences, there are some commonalities. Hence, in my paper, I emphasize on focusing both individual memory and public memory. Because what an individual experience, putting it on the given context, it helps us to reveal what a community might have experienced. Again, when individual narratives and explanation helps us develop ground theories, the collective nature will help us identify the pattern, and that will be beneficial to incorporate in policy level. In addition to that, I emphasized on the generational memory claims because the refugee community who spent decades in Bangladesh has generations who grew up in the refugee camps. What are their thoughts? How they perceive home? What repatriation means to them? How they are seeing the relocation? These questions are significant to consider on the ongoing refugee crisis. Therefore, in my research, I am incorporating both generational perspective and memory lens, as I believe it might help the Rohingyas to create their own voice. My query and focus about memory connects to the relocation plan. Based on media reports and academic platforms, it is quite prominent that secure repatriation is the solution of the ongoing crisis. The historical events say that Bangladesh always wanted the Rohingya refugees to return to their home country. At the same time, Bangladesh always rejected the claim of Myanmar that the Rohingyas belong to Bangladesh. Given the geopolitical ground, the relocation scheme to me raises a question that if Bangladesh is relocating Rohingyas to a secluded land, is it risking the repatriation scope? After giving the refugees certain kind of hope of having a better life, will they want to return? I think as a social scientist, it is high time we reconsider the historical and political aspects of this issue. First and foremost, we need to look into the refugee right. And for that, it is important to help them find their voice. Otherwise, they will never be able to find their own stand.
Just to interrupt you, we have 3 minutes.
Yeah, sure.
3 minutes left. Thank you.
Yeah. So after a series of massacre, when the Rohingya Muslims lived a stateless life, headed towards an uncertain future. And it is a timely manner to get new perspective and to shape new policies. I think it is important to look into the memory claims, and it is important to include the generational aspects to it. We don't want the Rohingya refugees to become the Palestinian of the further east. So if we want them to incorporate in the policy level, if we want a better future for them, if we want to take them into the policy level discussion and dialogue, it is important for them not to forget the past. We need to bring forward those memories to come up with effective solution or effective outcome. And this is why I think memory studies would be a significant component to incorporate in the Rohingya refugee studies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Tasama Prem, for your presentation. Next, we will connect Dr. Lailufar Yasmin from the Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka. She will be presenting on Rohingyas from disorganized hypocrisy to political neo-medievalism. Ms. Dr. Lailufar Yasmin.
Share screen. Oh, no. Let me check. Thank you very much for just a second. Okay. Thank you very much to IUB, to Imtiaz Hussain sir, and to the whole team for organizing this very excellent and very timely talk about Rohingya issues, because as we have been saying from 2017, that this is an issue that must be out there over and over again, so that the international community does not forget, so that we do not forget, so that it does not get sidelined, just the way a number of international international issues has got sidelined. From the morning, what I've been hearing that we are trying to emphasize on, what are the identity issues, what are the, issues with related to Bhashan Chor, what are the issues that, what are the ways international communities are sort of, assisting Bangladesh to tackle this particular crisis that we're going through. And also we have heard a lot of praise for Bangladeshi government that we have opened our doors. My paper, in fact, looks at it from a very IR, international relations perspective. And some of you who already know me, you know that I like to play with theories. I like to apply theory to a particular context. So here I bring in, as you can see, disorganized hypocrisy to political neo-medievalism, and how it actually assists Myanmar government to get away, if I may use the phrase, get away taking responsibility. Although we know that how ICJ and other international actors are trying to bring the Myanmar to justice and to make them to take responsibility of this. So what am I talking about here? First, we know that Rohingya crisis is not a new crisis. With the independence of Bangladesh, the youngest South Asian nation, we have inherited certain colonial troubles or colonial problems. One of those was the Rohingya issue. That Rohingya influx is not new in East Pakistan, later on in independent Bangladesh. But we have seen certain qualitative difference between what happened before and what happened in a post 2017 period. Before, we have seen that there were some kind of dialogue with the Myanmar government. There were some kind of repatriation process starting with the help of the UNHCR, UN being the being a body which was also heavily engaged. But in post 2017, we have seen that there is a qualitative difference, and it has not been able for Bangladesh to or Bangladesh and Myanmar to strike a deal so that Myanmar will, take Rohingyas back. So what went, wrong this time? So a number of, arguments are there. A number of scholars have argued that it is because of the citizenship issue. It is the internal crisis within Myanmar for which, they have been able to justify this particular type of, atrocities against the Rohingyas, which actually helped the incumbent government to win in elections. And so there has been a strong internal dimension for which the international community has not been able to push Myanmar to make to accept responsibility of this crisis. However, I bring in another perspective in discussing what is happening here, what is happening in bilateral discussion or multilateral discussions when it comes to Rohingya crisis. So the argument, as you can see from theoretical point of view, I'm saying that how state system itself is going through a substantial transition, and effect of those we have not really systematically checked before. And as a result of those, as a result of our failure to look at the theoretical changes, the practical changes that has taken place in Westphalian sovereignty system, that has helped Myanmar, that has actually emboldened Myanmar to take this particular type of, to use the Rohingyas as a test case here. So now let me come to the theoretical part, and then I'll go to the empirical part of the paper. So what do I mean by disorganized hypocrisy, political neo-medievalism? Here, the idea is that that comes from initially from the Westphalian system, the system of inviolability, that a state has an internal mechanism to maintain its law and order situation, and externally it is considered inviolable. From that perspective, United States of America or Bangladesh or China or Bhutan, we are all sovereign state, and we have our designated territory. Within that territory, in Weberian sense, we have the ultimate authority. this very whole idea is explained by a number of scholars in different ways. For example, John Agnew calls it a territorial trap, that humanity has, the system of sovereignty has, bounded humanity in this territorial trap that we need a passport. You can be an atheist, you can belong to a different religion, you can be a woman or a man, but in this today's world, you cannot survive if you don't have a passport. That is your citizenship, is your very first identity, whereas it is to be different in different times. So John Agnew argues that there is a territorial trap that has been created. But then again, Stephen Krasner has described it in his very famous work as organized hypocrisy, that a state taking advantage of this territorial trap, it can do whatever it wants to do within its territorial boundary. Then Amitav Acharya later on, giving reference to global war on terror of America's invasion to Afghanistan and Iraq, identified that how organized hypocrisy now has turned into disorganized hypocrisy. That is, a powerful state can violate the norms and principles of sovereignty, norms and principles of Westphalian order, by arguing that if a state is harboring terrorists, then that state is liable to take responsibility of that. So that what creates a structural instability. So the today, from 2016 onward, we have seen a number of articles being, scholars are arguing, number of articles being published in Foreign Affairs that out of order, liberal international order is in crisis. But the liberal international order was in crisis from that 2001 period, which Amitav Acharya calls as disorganized hypocrisy, because if a powerful state defies territorial border of another country, then the whole Westphalian system cannot remain as a viable system. But now what happens? Neo-medievalism is a concept which was first made famous by a scholar named, if I'm not pronouncing his name incorrectly, that's Umberto Eco in 1986, when he wrote an article titled "Dreaming of the Middle Ages." So he was talking about it in a sense that how state system is losing not only its viability, but at the same time we are seeing rather being loyal to a particular state authority. We are going back perhaps to our roots, to our identity, to our ethnic roots. So later on, Parag Khanna in 2009 in a Foreign Affairs article, he famously argued that what we are going to witness is the neo-medievalism is going to be the next big thing. But Hadley Bull, in his very famous The Anarchical Society in 1977, he argued about a new medievalism. He argued that gradually state system will be challenged. Gradually we will be seeing that different actors will be talking about how to manage their affairs with other states, and how the whole idea of sovereignty may become very loose. But he wrote in 1977, and right 2 years after that, we have seen Soviet invasion to Afghanistan at one hand, and then the Iranian Revolution.
Dr. Yasmin,
yes,
sorry to interrupt you. You have 3 minutes left.
Only okay. I'll go to So the whole structure is that the international order is in crisis. So what Myanmar did, taking advantage of this, first we have seen in this 2001 America's global war on terror. Then we have seen Russia's invasion to Ukraine, the Crimea, and taking Crimea. And then a number of scholars have started pointing out that it is Myanmar who has taken advantage of this particular situation. And 2017 was a test case of seeing the resilience of international community, whether Myanmar will go scot-free or whether Myanmar will be held responsible. You can see 2017 onward how international community responded. They have different kind of ties, interest in Myanmar. So at one hand, we can see that one of the latest reports say that foreign direct investment of China is the highest in Myanmar, which is over 25% of total foreign direct investment that is being done in that has gone to Myanmar. But at the same time, we have seen, as Imtiaz Ahmed Sir pointed out in the earlier session, that Japan, India, and India's policies towards Myanmar, how it has gone through transition. All of these things I have discussed elaborately in my paper, which has already been submitted. to Imtiaz Hussain sir. So all of this, taking stock from all of this analysis, I'm arguing that the way we want to resolve this crisis, maybe we need to take a little step back and look at what is the state of the current world order. Yes, with Joe Biden taking over, American leadership now, America perhaps will re-engage, but how far America will re-engage? And we have seen a very promising news that Joe Biden is going to investigate whether it was a genocide or not. We all know it was a genocide, and this case now will be actively pursued by America. So now we can see that there is some kind of promises are there, but at the same time we need to look into this thing that when there is no responsible actor taking part actively being engaged in international politics, what happens? The system collapses. And in 2001 we have seen a superpower doing that. In 2014 we have seen Russia taking advantage of that. 2017 we can see Myanmar testing the patience of international community. Yes, I'm finishing right now. Myanmar has, doing that. So maybe when we are trying to, resolve this crisis, we need to sort of look into this particular issue from this perspective as well. Thank you very much. I thought, I'd be able to put into more on Myanmar analysis, but time is a factor here, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you have later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. The question will be asked at the end of the discussion.
Yeah, I'll be here.
So please be connected. Next, I would invite Dr. Shireen Shahjahan Naomi, Assistant Professor, Department of Gender Studies, Asian University of Women. She will be presenting on From PT Objects to Fully Potential Subjects, Refugee Epistemology and Rohingya Women.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Okay, I will start now. Rohingya women.
10 minutes time. Please be aware of the time, 10 minutes. Okay, thank you.
Rohingya women in refugee camps of Bangladesh have been often depicted as helpless, powerless, object of pity, burden, and pessimistic in the hegemonic narrative on Rohingya refugees. Although the global approach of presenting refugees as a victim is motivated by benign purpose to invoke empathy and global concern, feminist engagement on refugee women has been very critical about this approach due to its inclination towards monolithic representation. Feminist refugee epistemology will help us to explore the subjectivity of Rohingya refugee women for reclaiming life in a space of healing and uncertainty in Bangladesh. According to Anthropology, Lisa Maliki, 1996, there is a substantially standardized way of talking about and handling refugee problem. In this standardized way, representation of refugee as a victim has been idealized. Maliki emphasized that the dominant narrative on traumatized and victimized image of refugee may not always conform to the ways refugee would like to define their subjectivities that emerge from their own histories and situation. Although it is an undeniable fact that representation of refugees as a victim of war, natural disaster, persecution have benevolent intention to invoke empathy for humanitarian assistance, popularization of a singular category of victim and dependent identity for refugee might hinder the potential and possibilities of refugees for empowerment and holistic intervention. The tendency to depict refugee women as a fixed category of object of pity and charity have been subject to critical scrutiny by the feminist scholar. A growing feminist literature has argued that these images have objectified displaced women in the global south for invoking empathy for the audience in the global north. In this regard, La Esperidu and Yen Dong advocates for feminist refugee epistemology, which can turn our attention towards refugees' rich and complicated lives and the ways in which they enact their hope, belief, dream, and politics in day-to-day life in exile. Feminist refugee epistemology stands on feminist epistemology, which directs our attention towards reclaiming women power, agency in the narrative, and knowledge that are about them. According to Elizabeth Anderson, feminist epistemology examines how gender influences our definition, value, and legitimacy of knowledge and process of inquiry. Feminist epistemology argues for situated knowledge, knowledge that acknowledges the particular perspective of the knower. Feminist epistemology's adherence to situated knowledge radically challenges the Western fantasy for coherent and linear narratives in terms of atomistic individual subjectivity separate from its surrounding and relation. As a part of feminist epistemology's interest, feminist standpoint theory strives to make voice and agency of women visible and knowable, whose experience have been made topic of any research. According to Harding, the subject of knowledge for standpoint theory is embodied, has multiplicity and contradictory aspects in being, and researcher reflexivity has a role to play in the construction of this subject. In response to media rhetoric of victim image of refugee, Lee Espiritu and Yen Dong proposed feminist refugee epistemology in 2018 based on both transnational feminist critical stance on objectification of third world women and critical refugee studies approach to problematizing refugee as a fixed category of dependency and vulnerability. Although their main interest had been on visual representation of refugee, their concepts have far more potential to be used as a critical tool for analyzing dominant narratives about refugees originating from media and research. Transnational feminism endeavors to provide a global perspective on women issues that widens our understanding on the nuances of patriarchy, capitalism, and colonialism. By joining representation in the public space and day-to-day life politics of women, color, refugees, immigrants, and other marginalized gender identities, transnational feminism expands its analytical insights of oppression and subjectivity within and beyond the border. In the book, Body Counts, the Vietnam War and the Militarized Refugee, Espiritu critically analyzes how imperialism, war, and displacement casted a rescued category on refugee without taking into account their agency in political struggle and cultural space. Rajaram contends that representation of refugee in humanitarian regime as a helplessness and loss convert refugees to mute and faceless physical mass in the politicized and the historicized image. The resistance to reduce the category of refugee to victim begins with reconceptualizing refugee as a source of knowledge, as a site of social and political critique. The hegemonic picture of Rohingya women in refugee camp of Bangladesh is not exceptional to the dominant image of refugee women.
Dr. Naomi, 3 minutes left. Sorry for the interruption.
No worries. In the current literature on Rohingya women, needs and problem are more focused and attendant due to the most of the research project affiliation with humanitarian operational research need. Research based on this theoretical lens. We could explore subjectivities of Rohingya women that emerge from cultural identity and belongingness, encountering memory of persecution and displacement, developing resilience and network to address their gender-based vulnerabilities, and embracing the possibilities for agency and contribution to the community. In the long run, this perspective can lead to more creative and effective development intervention for Rohingya refugee women. This paper is dedicated to my Rohingya students who have made me realize that there are also human beings with immense possibilities to contribute to our community, and they have the agency, voice, and creativities to give meaning to their life. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Naomi, for your nice presentation. Next, we'll invite here Ms. Jessica Tartila Suma, lecturer, Global Studies and Governance Program, and she will be presenting on Rohingya refugees and classroom children. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my title is Rohingya Refugees and Classroom Children, where I'm focusing more on the education perspective of the Rohingyas and how that is going to lead towards the emancipation. And while talking about this refugee situation and their education, it makes us realize that at that point, globalization confronts localization, and most bluntly in the refugee camps. So the Global Refugee Compact's Education in Emergencies, EIE, which is imparted to Rohingya children, faces all sorts of dilemmas, and mainly because the Rohingyas can only attain education pertaining to Myanmar curriculum. So the most pertinent question is, what will they use this education for if they do not repatriate? And if they're here, if they do not have job legitimacy in this country? And on the other hand, my colleagues have already discussed, is at stake is their identity crisis. So between these two components of socioeconomic survival and political realities, education is not playing any pivotal role. While refugee education service around the world is tailored according to the regional placement of the refugees and the willingness of the host countries to provide such services, the transnational actors also play a pivotal role at the dispense of such knowledge. And this particular paper finds education in emergencies is likely to bring a global trigger. So a little bit of background here is on what's happening. Okay. Yeah, the background here is on what is happening in the camp actually. There are more than 540,000 refugee children who are aging between 3 to 14 years of age and who do not have access to formal education. And that means they do not pass any grade level. And it is also reported that 97% of the youth who ages between 14 to 24 years, they lack any form of education or any vocational training. So that takes me to the understanding of the education in emergencies. And this particular issue of educations in emergencies, how the system of designing and disseminating knowledge to the refugee to empower them is being used here to inquire how transnational education might trigger refugee discontent. Ultimately, what I call here is producing a lost generation. And also, in order to meet the SDG 4, which is equal rights to quality education, the global community is to ensure quality education for all children and youth, a pledge that continues to be neglected. For the world, it is not to engender a lost generation. It is imperative that children affected by conflict get access to education, learn in a quality and safe environment, and receive relevant knowledge. In short, for SDG 4 to be achieved. So the right to education is often perceived as an enabling right, and that's how I portray it in my paper here. An enabling right is one through which the other rights can be achieved, and it is preserved within the international legal instruments, such as the Geneva Convention and the Refugee Convention. So the EIE definition covers formal and non-formal educational activities during any emergencies. Thus, education from a humanitarian aspect is never neutral. Like any other three pillars like food, shelter, and health, it is inherently ideological and political. And therefore, the developing a framework to understand the association between education and politics becomes relevant while conceptualizing education in crisis. This paper takes a note of these association as the Rohingyas' refugee education could be understood along the lines of the association between conflict, education, and fragility. Here in this context, the Rohingya fragility. Therefore, under a crisis situation, the ontology pertaining to what the scholars called, quote unquote, legitimate knowledge, which refers to curriculum to be used for refugees, is determining the power relation between multinational organization and the states here, Bangladesh and Myanmar. So next is my argument. I don't know what is happening. Sorry for the inconvenience. This is taking away my time. Can I have the 5th slide, Marufapa? Are you sure? The one previous to that. The arguments? Yeah, thank you. The arguments. So the argument that my paper presents is the three variables: the ontology of curriculum, host country willingness, and the Rohingya fragility. By fragility, I again repeat what I mean is by their identity in Myanmar and in Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, they're called as forcefully displaced Myanmar nationals. And how that influenced the Rohingya education outcomes for the long haul, generating a lost generation. On the other hand, I use James Rossinius Tarbonan's theory to show that there exists a micro-macro tension while transnational education is being imparted to the refugee children, especially the Rohingyas, and how that education uncomfortably is positioned between playing a catalytic or even intervening variable towards Rohingya emancipation. So the research question is actually, why will Rohingya education only make sense and play a vital role in their lives post-repatriation and citizenship acquisition? That takes me to my theoretical framework. The Rohingya education in emergency dilutes in three fork dimension: the Rohingya fragility, willingness of the host country to provide them formal education, and third, the ontology of the curriculum developed by the transnational actors, and all these prolonged issues leading towards an outcome that may not see the end of the tunnel. I'm not going to discuss the first two variables because I will not have the time today. I'm going to focus more on the ontology of education. But under such a theoretical underpinning, the Rohingyas are expected to be a prismatic society or are expected to cultivate frustration and explode. Either ways, the situation do not visualize and order out of chaos, rather a protected chaos. By fragility, if we just how that is connected to the ontology of education, is no democratic transition in Myanmar acknowledges Rohingyas as national. Hence, the Rohingya reality is a fragile existence as an ethnic group without land to call their own. And how these people, when they're suffering from conflict-based trauma, how are these people expected to raise their conscience to function when the fragile condition only adds to their frustration? As the saying goes, a hungry man is an angry man, and an angry man can revolt at any time. So since human fragility will break down the moral conscience, the practicing of knowledge, whether it is local or transnational, eventually becomes a distant, tangible image. So going back to the willingness of the host country and how that affects the ontology of Rohingya education is that globalization and international governance system do hold nation states accountable for their actions as a party to several conventions. Bangladesh's back is to the wall in this context. Understanding that legitimate knowledge invokes power relations between multilateral organizations, Bangladesh and Myanmar. Bangladesh considers that Rohingyas as forcible displaced Myanmar national and therefore will not bring about any chaos within its own territory, which could trigger another internal conflict owing to Rohingya rehabilitation. This makes education one of the most important intervening variables. While it keeps the potential to integrate the Rohingyas with the mainstream Bangalis, the consequence of which may be reflected in the Bangladesh economy and security arenas. Therefore, Bangladesh's willingness to help educate the Rohingyas may be measured in terms of Bangladesh's internal security and political will, adhering to the fact that government of Bangladesh keeps its high hope on Rohingya repatriation. And this actually brings us to the ontology of the curriculum. What does this ontology of the curriculum do? The ontology of Rohingya education curriculum may be explained in two ways. One, education in emergency conditions and Rohingya repatriation. Since Rohingyas will follow a Myanmar curriculum, the ontological disputes which is undermined by the transnational actors could be understood in the light of the Rohingya realities, that is the way the Bangladesh government and the international agencies perceive the future of these people, which actually relates back to the fourth joint response plan strategic objective through the Rohingya repatriation. Keeping in view this reality of Rohingya repatriation, the Bangladesh government earlier did not find it viable to provide Rohingya education. So under this LCFA framework, collaboration with government of Bangladesh translated into educating the Rohingya formally, albeit on a pilot sample. So thus the curriculum of ontology may be defined in terms of aggregating a spurious relationship between independent variables, the willingness of the host country, the Rohingya identity crisis, and EIE framework of the national actors. This then seems to have no connection to the future, with a value-laden generation that is likely to be lost in chaos. The next slide, please. So what is this order out of chaos? Here is a few of the questions which you can see in my slide are very much pertinent, where this chaos is leading to if Rohingyas are not able to achieve their educational emancipation, getting a better job, or their refugee tag should be removed. What is this education actually going to yield? And if they're entrapped in Bangladesh, what kind of regional chaos can we portray in future? So these are the few other questions that my paper tries to answer. So this is the last part where I find that from the theoretical framework and the table that you can see here, I'll not be explaining the table, but some of the points that some of the thoughts that get stirred is that in the first place, the novel EIE platform serves the purpose of protecting the children and the youth, integrating in the society, and restoring the normalcy from an extreme traumatizing experience. This is the micro-level achievable skill development for the Rohingyas to gain resilience. Yet, since not all Rohingya children have access to education, a macro-level decision emerges as to when and how all Rohingya children will enter to formal education. Secondly, the parameters then leaves us with the question, if it raises the critical conscience of refugees as rational actors of maximizing interest or subjectively forced back into their castigated identity, owing precisely to that identity and efforts to reclaim it. Resilience cannot but grow. However, the parameters and the dimensions of such resilience is uncertain at the refugee stage. Therefore, the skills developed through education in the camp, whether or not reflect the social, political, or economic realities, macro-level decision as to how many Rohingyas will be educated and live a dignified life through education may shape more outcomes than not. Does the EIE framework transform to Rohingya cultural entity? The more this education is likely to transform into their cultural identity, the more they're likely to be wanting their dignity and identity back, seeking it now at a macro level. Which gets to the point, only at a macro level does the local refugee knowledge connect with transnational knowledge. Chaos created through such a situation will bring about a change likely to cause regional turbulence, but to a newer order. However, since the EIE's purpose is not to connect to Rohingya cultural entity, let alone raise critical conscience, and neither does it ensure any sort of dignity through job security, at least not in the host community. It will bring about another kind of change, owing to frustration and anger amongst the refugee masses, creating a regional upheaval from which seeking order would be again another distant reality. Therefore, education without ensuring any long-term survival outcomes becomes the opium of the refugees. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you all of the presenter here. So our presentation is done. Now we will have our discussion section. Before that, may I request the guests present here? We have tea and coffee over there. Please help yourself and have this refreshment. May I now request Dr. C.R. Abrar, Executive Director, Refugee and Migratory Movement Research Unit, to have a discussion on the paper presented in this session. I welcome you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Sharmeen Ahmed. It has been a delight to listen to the presentations, coming from a diverse range of scholars with diverse academic sort of background. And I'm delighted to have a look at the program itself. It has brought in a whole range of stakeholders. We have senior academics, researchers, we have representative of international organizations who are involved in providing services. We have senior government functionaries. Some have spoken in the morning, some will be speaking later in the day, and some of whom had critical role to play in shaping this particular, if you call it crisis, this particular situation. They had their own input. And it was fascinating to hear the young academics, trying to, I mean, young and not so young, because some people may get upset, I cannot tag everyone young, but at heart, everyone is young. So in that respect, I'm right. Academics trying to zero in on the problems that beset this refugee community. And I think in that respect, it's a huge endeavor that the Independent University of Bangladesh has undertaken, and quite timely. And I congratulate them, and I thank them for them to take me on board in this session. I mean, if we come to the, I mean, I'll divide my time for about 10, 12 minutes. I'll discuss the presentations, and then a few of my, 2 penny worth of thought I'll share with you. I mean, this is, as I said, history has been one of the key things, the issue of identity. Many of the speakers, mention about the question of identity, albeit in some addressed in different sort of context. I mean, we all realize the issue of history, border, identity are integral to the Rohingya question, and in terms of this issue of, if they are exogenous to the region. I mean, and I think that particular question has been very well addressed by Michael Charney, SOAS professor of history. And he said, if Rohingyas are exogenous to the region, so are the Rakhines. This was a barren land, and this was a land, uninhabited land, and people came from different parts, and ultimately they lived together, and over centuries until the Brits came and created chaos. And Brit scholarship, essentially forgot to take into account, the existence of these people long before that they had come. So in a sense, this whole debate about whether Rohingyas are indigenous people or not is a non-starter, because no one is an indigenous people, and that's something we need to pay heed to. And there are historical evidence to inform that Rohingyas were bona fide. I mean, that's something I would take up with the first speaker. I mean, if I have understood him correctly, I think he is a bit hesitant to appreciate the bona fide citizenship of the Rohingyas to Myanmar. I think there is replete with evidence that these people were there. Even official Burmese encyclopedia published in the mid-1960s have a separate chapter on the Rohingyas. The Burmese radio, had programs, until the late 60s, in the Rohingya in the Rohingya language, and also there was representation of the Rohingya, until 10 years ago in the Burmese parliament. So no one can doubt the veracity of the citizenship of the Rohingyas, genuine citizenship of the Rohingyas. And the Burmese state, the rogue state that it is, in 1982 through a fiat or law, enactment of law, deprived the bona fide citizens their citizenship rights. But that does not mean they forfeit to be citizens of that particular country. So that's something we need to bear in mind. The second speaker, I think it's very, very important point that she made about belongingness, the whole concept of the value of listening to the people whom we are trying to serve, and I mean in a sense, and they're the very important point, the collective experience, and if we pay heed to them, if we listen to them, if we get their voice on board, and only then we can have proper policy framing. And this is something, just completely amiss in the whole issue of, addressing the Rohingya problem. The state refuses to acknowledge, their voice. The international organizations, in a way, are better served, to the way they feel to be the correct approach to do that. And mainstream non-governmental organizations as well. and I would say, are not much of a sort of, do not feel the urge or the need to understand what, or to know what these people would like to say. So there is a complete disconnect between the felt needs of these people and the policies that are being made, one from one to the other. I mean, time precludes me from providing with examples, but I think the speaker has really zeroed it in terms of the question of arguing that we need to listen to their voice. And if we do not listen to that voice, in all likelihood, whatever policy prescriptions, however resources that we may mobilize for them may not necessarily be properly sort of utilized. And then we had a very interesting presentation from Dr. Biswas, my colleague, and it's really good to see the person who's trained in hardcore realist school, transitioning to understand the voice of the subaltern, making efforts to go to the field, trying to pick up the points that they are making, and I think it's a very, very important points that he has raised, the issue of host community and how it is perceived, and the sense concept of solitarist identity. I think that's very important. The whole process of securitization, discrimination, statelessness. So in a way, what the Burmese did to the Rohingyas, if we look at dispassionately, I guess to a large extent, we have fallen into the same trap and trying to identify or address the Rohingya problem somewhat in similar perspective. No wonder, months after the current influx of the Rohingyas in this country, a very, very senior functionary of the state was making this point at a conference. That what he felt was, I quote, that at the end of the day, what he understood is Rohingyas are essentially a question of border, human mobility, and law and order, completely in sync what the Burmese want us to believe. Why do I say that? Because it is a complete denial that genocide is in progress in the other part of the border. And what the regime is doing is expelling people, for decades, to get Rohingyas out of the Rakhine land. And we have, in that respect, have been very slow, or even till this day, I don't think it has sunk into us. And then he talked about, very sort of cogently, he argued question of, branding them as polygamous, criminal, unruly, I think it reminded me of one of the earlier days when Hill people were trying to organize themselves. At the Shohid Minar, there was this program. So I went in a bit early, and then the Bengalis were taunting them. These young people, Hill people trying to put up placard and, banner and all that, and said, oh, what do these Hill people want in this? Why have they come to the city? And I could not keep my rage. I said that they have come to the city for the same reason your and my father came to the city. And this guy was just taken aback. So this is essentially the whole question of othering. And this othering is taking place in Myanmar. This othering is taking place is here. And if we talk about criminality, if I just pick up one point, we all know after the Sinha murder case, who the criminals are. It's members of law enforcement agencies, of the extrajudicial killings that have taken place in Cox's Bazar, Teknaf region, 50% victims were Rohingyas. And may I also remind that National Human Rights Commission in one of its deliberations years ago, the Coast Guards, BGB, and local functionaries, they all said that, why should we blame these people? The kingpins are all Bengalis. They're very powerful people. And we all know the reality. So these are some of the issues, I think, quite deftly that has been brought. I really look forward to the final output of the research that he is doing. Lailufer, it's very interesting. Her, as she said, history, theory is her forte, and she has walked us through the various theories that have come about. And she didn't get the opportunity to sort of explain in details of the Rohingya context in applying that theory. I wish she had the time, and I hope during the course of discussion, she'll get the opportunity. Sharmin Naomi, objects of pity, charity. I think the whole question, I'm not familiar with the literature, but what she has, the way she has presented it, I think there is a wealth of things to be there to tap from the feminist, perspective, and this whole idea of, trying to invoke, empathy of the North by presenting them as victims. I could not agree with this anymore. This is definitely very well put, and there is a need for reconceptualizing refugees as source of knowledge. I think that's something we need to do. The whole question of resilience and network development, we have to be creative, effective, agency, voice. I think these are very, very important points that she has mentioned and provided us somewhat of a new way of looking at this very, very complex sort of question. Jessica Schumer, with regard to education, obviously SDG 4, and also the violation of the protocols and the conventions on rights of the child. And this is something the government has completely over decades, we failed to sort of acknowledge the reality that we are obligated, to provide education to the Rohingya children. And whatever little progress that has been made, I think very aptly she mentioned that what would this lead to? I mean, if they become educated, and if the repatriation is not forthcoming, so would there be, if I've understood her correctly, this could perhaps lead to a backlash, And I think in this respect, I come to my particular, I don't know, madam, how many minutes I've got, but certainly I would like to throw in some of the points in this regard. What should we do? Here is with this impasse, and how do we go out of this impasse? I think one of the first things that we need to acknowledge is the Rohingya identity. There are still, I mean, in deference to the Burmese, we did not term the Rohingyas for years and years, and no explanation. We denied them the right to self-identify themselves, and that itself is a breach of international law, And the issue of genocide. I mean, someone mentioned. I mean, are we committed? That has it sunk in amongst ourselves that this is a genocide? I mean, I doubt it very much. In the diplomatic discussions, and I don't think we are pushing this thing in this agenda as much. The whole question, we are still denying the term refugees, to describe these people officially, as has been rightly said. We have termed them with displaced Myanmar. There are displaced Myanmar national Rohingyas within Myanmar. Certainly there is a big difference between that cohort and those who are in Bangladesh. They have crossed international border. And if in 1978, 1991, 92, if we could acknowledge them as refugees, why should not we acknowledge them as refugees now? Because if we do not acknowledge them as refugees, then in a way, I think it's self-defeating. Because the moment we say them as refugees and international community accepts them as refugees, it's a responsibility of international community as a whole. Although international community now are looking after these refugees, but there may be time when the donor fatigue sets in. And I think in that respect, it's very important that we take that into account and get our these labeling right. And also it's about time we get out of this fetishism with good neighborliness. We have been too good to the neighbors, and what has been good neighborliness has been deemed as weakness by the rogue state that is located in the East. And as a result, we talked about looking east, looking towards east, constructive engagement, connectivity, But at the end of the day, while we were trying to deal with all these fancy words and trying to placate them, they essentially expelled Rohingyas for decades. And virtually, there are more Rohingyas outside the country than there are within Bangladesh. And and our inability to even garner international support, Forget about the big powers, the UN Security Council members, even the aspirant Security Council members like Japan, India, the way they have been, and on the other hand, China, the Security Council member, it appears that their investment in Bangladesh, their trade relationship with Bangladesh, these are of nothing. So is it Burma which has got everything to offer? Bangladesh does not have anything to offer? I don't believe so. Without Bangladesh's support, Northeast Indian problem could not have been addressed anyway. Have our policymakers been able to tap into that at a time where Rohingyas were crossing the border, being victims of genocide? Mr. Modi went there, to express solidarity with the genocidal regime, and these are the bitter truths. And there has hardly been any difference in the Indian approach, substantive difference, in this regard. We also failed to what you call mobilize our neighbors, Nepal and Sri Lanka, to side with us on the Rohingya question. So these are some of the broader frame. My last point, I would say, I guess time has come for us to move out of this emergency, mode. We have to acknowledge the reality that these people would be around for the foreseeable future. Hence, and international funding may not be forthcoming, if there is a major crisis somewhere else, there may be a major problem. So we have to sort of take that into account. And nothing could be better investment than develop the human resources of these people. Go for education, proper education, go for skills training, go for income generation activities. These are some of the things that need to be really thought about. This should not be taboo subjects to discuss. This is something we need to really take on board if you would really like to see these people, and the point that Jessica mentioned in her presentation, they should not feel frustrated at the end of the day. Provide them with some kind of identity card so that they are not harassed by the police. I'm finishing it, madam. I'm just at the very last moment. I think there is strong need to desecuritize the Rohingya question. This is something, the media plays it a great deal. Government does. We academics also, become unwilling a part of it. I'm not saying, there are rogue elements within the system. They are not all paragon of virtue. And like any community, there are, criminal elements, but certainly we should not overplay that. And, if we do not want them to disturb the universe that we are in, or the neighbors, the ASEAN neighbors who have not done anything, then perhaps time has come to acknowledge that there has to be meaningful engagement of these people so that they find their life worthwhile and do not engage in things that we do not condone. These are some of the issues. And my final point is there is a thriving Rohingya diaspora. I think we must also try to tap in to their resource. And if there are opportunities for third country resettlement, that needs to be thought about, because the government's position all along has been, if we allow them, then more Rohingyas would come. In fact, more Rohingyas had come anyway, so that's the reality. And if there is one less Rohingya in this land, better it is for everyone. And through family reunification and through negotiations with third countries, those who go for refugee settlement, this is something.
Sorry, sir,
I'm ending it here. I'm just ending it in one here. So we need to be creative. We need to be innovative. We need to unhook ourselves from this securitized, or security sort of approach and look at it, from this and acknowledge, again, as one of the speakers, very cogently argued, we need to hear the voice of the Rohingyas. Thank you very much, madam.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Very well thought discussion. Now we have a few questions. Please try to respond, the respected panelists.
The interactive answers, the very brief answers and very well presented papers made us awake in this post-lunch period. Thank you to the discussants. We have few questions. We will try to make it very short. Both of the panelists, the questions are, first of all, for Dr. Lailofer Yasmin. It's about how important is the international intervention to solve the issue, and what role does neighboring countries mainly China and India, can play in this political and economic issue? We would highly appreciate Dr. Lalfar Yasmin if you could keep your answer to very short and brief answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, it's actually $1 million question. Since the crisis unfolded, we have seen in August the influx is going on, and then immediately within months, Indian Prime Minister going to Myanmar and talking about increased relationship between Myanmar and India. So we have seen that how those, as Abrar sir has very rightly pointed out, that our good neighborliness is often seen as our weakness. So we have not been able to harness the strengths that we have. That we have a number of areas that we can work on. But we have seen there has been a significant shift in Indian policy since March onward. There's a very interesting paper published by ORF highlighting what are the different stages of India's response to Myanmar crisis, and the last stage, which is I identified, where India is now understanding the benefit of having Bangladesh by its side, given the way South Asian politics, regional politics is going on. So here I find that this is something that we need to cash on. This is something we need to point out. And also with China and Japan, and who are our biggest, some of our biggest partners in terms of financial and commercial areas, but their stance on Myanmar issue is completely different. So how can we bring them on board? And that we need not only diplomatic endeavors, not only G2G works, but also we need to connect with the connect at the intellectual level, and we need to make them understand that Bangladesh has its own potential. In my other works, I always try to point out that why India and China are so much interested to come to Bangladesh or other great powers, something that I've been writing since 2016. And I'm pointing out that Bangladesh has its own strength, and that is something that we even forget. And in a number of seminars, even that took place this year and last year, we keep calling us a small state. See, if you think that you are a small state, if you think that you do not have any bargaining power, you cannot resolve your own problem. So that is where we have to change our mindset. Other than that, I don't see Bangladesh can make any differences. So I argue that this mindset at the intellectual level, at the policy level, we must have to be assertive.
Yes, can we keep it a bit short?
Yes, I'm just finishing. We have to be assertive, and that is how I think we can bring them on board. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer. I think we can take just one more question, and that will be from the online platform as well. And then that will be to Dr. Shirin Shahjahan. The question is about how can Bangladesh government help Rohingya women becoming a productive member of the society and not just an immediate refugee, sorry.
Thank you.
Ji.
Yes. Thank you. So I think the first thing is to change the mindset, because we can't think them as a burden or someone who needs to be returned. We need to think that as long as they're here, they can be the productive member of the community. We need to change the way we are constructing the narrative around them. In this narrative, we are emphasizing more on their atrocities, their engagement with criminal activities, and their security issues. But we are not listening that there are Rohingya women who are doing very well in the educational institution. There are Rohingya boys who want to have higher study in our country. So I think first of all, we need to change the discourse, the hegemonic narrative, and that should come from the government. Whether they will go back or not, that comes to the second question. But first of all, as long as they're here, we should give them the chance to study, to have the basic human rights that all the citizens of Bangladesh have, except probably the voting rights. And that's not a big deal, especially to give them the right to education, which I think Rohingya women do not have. Rohingya children might have in the camps, but I think after a certain age, they don't have the scope for quality education. And that should be the starting point to let them work in the community. And I think most of the speakers have actually emphasized the ways we could develop our intervention. So not a charity-based intervention, but an intervention that is leading towards their holistic empowerment, that is ensuring their income generating activities. At the same time, that are also addressing their well-being. We know in the Rohingya camps there are women-friendly space which are supporting mental health of Rohingya women, but without a financial support, to have a support of mental health is not enough. So I think we need to think about a holistic intervention that support their financial need and well-being.
Thank you, Dr. Sharin Naomi, for your answer. And I think we are running a bit late, so I don't think we can take more questions for this session. And let's take a 10 to 15 minutes break and we get back for the presentation. Thank you. Next session will be on camp life and management, and we hope to start it in next 10 minutes. Thank you.